This is a mixing with mic tip on Vari-Mu compression, or tube compression as it's more commonly known. Now, Vari-Mu compressors, there are very few of them that are real true Vari-Mu compressors. The Fairchild and the Manley Vari-Mu compressor are two obvious examples of that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The basic idea is that you have a tube, right? So you have a vacuum tube here with all its little whatever pins and all that sort of stuff. And essentially what you're doing is you're feeding a side chain voltage which varies the bias current of the tube. So normally a tube is set to a particular saturation state by a steady bias current, a voltage that's fed in at a particular frequency. And what this does is it keeps the tube heated to a certain point. So when you apply a signal through it, you can maintain a certain distortion characteristic to it, or a stable distortion characteristic. If you overbias something, it will have a tendency to lose the high frequency response, distort more, but you'll get a richer, warmer low end. And if you don't bias enough, generally what you get is a lot more noise, more high frequency response, but the low end has a tendency to suffer. So usually the biasing of a tube is very important because it helps to balance the frequencies of the audio signal that's passing through it. If you vary this bias current, though, essentially what you're doing is you're also controlling the overall gain. You can sort of think of a bias current as like a carrier signal for your audio signal because it's going to determine several things about it. The amount of gain that the audio signal is going to pass through the tube and its frequency response. So in that respect, what happens with a Vari-Mu compressor or tube compressor is that the more you compress with it, and the compression is just a natural part of the distortion characteristic of the tube, then you're going to also change the frequency response. So when you're working with tube compressors, pure tube compressors, generally if you overhit them, they will have a tendency to flatten out a little bit in terms of the high frequency response. But that will add a warmth or richness to the low end that you might not want. So there's a balance in here where you can kind of play with this, and that's basically what's going on here. So all compression circuits are basically the same. Some like VCAs are a little bit more transparent, or FETs where you can compress a lot without necessarily a loss in high frequency response. Some have a tendency to flatten out a bit more. Optical components being another example of that when you're using optical for compression. Now, the two classic types of compressors, or the two obvious ones that are most common in terms of the Vari-Mu, are the Fairchild compressor, which is a long, historic, widely sought after unit. They are extremely expensive. And they maintain not just single tubes, but they actually have many tubes that are part of the circuit. This is a real Fairchild 670 compressor. Early on, they will, if you look at them, they will have lateral and vertical listed instead of left and right, or in addition to left-right, and that is part of when they would be used, for example, in the cutting lathe, in the path of a cutting lathe for compression and as part of that circuit. And then you have the Manley stereo Vari-Mu compressor, which is a very popular compressor for mastering and incredible sounding compression unit. Now, if we go over to a quick session here, I have some drums that I'm going to feed into a Fairchild emulation by Waves called a Puig Child, and I'll turn off some of the saturation circuit or harmonic distortion circuit that they have here. But essentially what you have case will not give you attack and release characteristics. Like when you look at optical compressors, most of them do not have attack and release time settings, or that becomes an extra circuit which allows that to happen. So the actual characteristic curve of the attack and release is basically affected by the component that you're using for the actual process of compression or gain reduction. And that's the basic idea here. But what you have is a threshold, an input gain, a threshold, and the input gain will also drive and transformer circuitry that's involved, so that will affect the sound quality. The threshold will determine when the gain reduction starts to occur, and then you have the time constant, which is like a release characteristic in this particular case. And then they give you options in terms of the way that you could use it in a mid-side mode, which is the lateral vertical, left-right, independent, or just linked together. Now, when you actually take it in, what this will do, part of what makes the circuit sound amazing is also all the tubes and the transformers that are part of the circuit that are not necessarily being used for the... But you can hear, as I start to do this, how it really starts to kind of flatten out. And of course, you're going to have more gain that you would use on the makeup side. But you could hear how it kind of takes away from some of the life of the audio signal there. And that would not be uncommon. It sort of starts to flatten it out because the tube will only be able to saturate so much. So generally with these compressors, sometimes they're best employed in a very light way. And when use in use in the real thing, all the tube circuitry and everything will add a richness, a full-bodiedness, a depth, a focus of imaging that is ridiculous sounding. It's a very common compressor. You can use it on vocals, on basses, on anything that needs warmth, richness, and basically size. And that's really the beauty of the Fairchild compressor. And the Vari-Mu compressor is a bit cleaner, a little bit more transparent sounding, the manly one, than the Fairchild, but also very good. And now you see many companies that are making emulations in actual hardware form of the Fairchild. A very difficult thing to achieve and get right, since the classic was so amazing. But there's a quick example of a classic tube compressor, Vari-Mu compressor, and that is wraps up this Mixing with Mike tip. So there you have it, Mixing with Mike tip on tube compression. And you can join the live Mixing with Mike classes every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. mpginsider.com. Go there. If you join the newsletter, then you can, or sign up to the newsletter, you can receive notifications for classes and class times and attend the live classes for free. And also you can go there to see many more Mixing with Mike tips. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for tuning in.